Homage to fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to wisdom, warrior Manjushri. Homage to all lineage benevolent masters. The Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in 1,000,000 eons. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize Tathagata's true meaning in order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta. Today we're teaching the words of my perfect teacher, teaching the words of my perfect teacher from the great perfection. It's both long and not long in terms of time. I don't know exactly how many classes it will take to complete. When I say it's not long, generally speaking for our study when I listened to it before, it was taught in 2 or 3 months. From this perspective, it seems quite a long time, but regardless, everyone should listen with a yearning heart because the opportunity to hear the Dharma is precious. I personally also feel that if the words of my perfect teacher is completed, it should be said to be the greatest project of my life. That's what I think. For each of you as well, I hope this Dharma teaching will have a good beginning and good ending. I have such a hope. Now we're teaching Bodhicitta, and within Bodhicitta we first teach the 4 immeasurables. Within the 4 immeasurables we're currently teaching boundless compassion. Actually, we must cultivate the 4 immeasurables. Everyone talks about Bodhicitta, they constantly mention Bodhicitta, but actually Bodhicitta requires theoretical understanding. Bodhicitta requires practical cultivation. These 2 conditions must be met. If theoretically you don't understand the basic principles of Mahayana Buddhism, your practice might become blind cultivation. If you only have theory without actual practice, you become an impervious practitioner who only talks but doesn't practice or act. So now, whether in the East or West, among Buddhists, there are often those who recite Mahayana Sutras orally, study Mahayana treatises, and even some teachings of highest Tantra. But if genuine bodhicitta hasn't arisen in their mind stream, then these teachings instead become Hinayana or worldly dharma, having no relationship or connection with truly obtaining liberation from the 3 realms of samsara. So every Buddhist, especially those studying Mahayana Buddhism, I think it's not for fame, profit, or other purposes. Worldly people often pursue fame and fortune, often pursue the 8 worldly concerns. But I think a relatively pure Mahayana Buddhist, their purpose should be learning and following the path. But if genuine bodhicitta hasn't truly arisen in their mind stream, indeed liberation is very distant. So we should still try every means possible from all aspects to first generate boundless equanimity, boundless love, boundless compassion, and boundless joy in our mind stream. Then continuously use bodhicitta to transform our mind. When we see pitiful beings, when we hear about pitiful beings, first have a transformative mind. Try to forcefully generate this transformative compassion. Then naturally compassion will spontaneously arise. It should be this way. So everyone must treat this seriously in the process of practice. We'll continue and today still carry on teaching. First, let's talk about ordinary beings. Observing compassion for sentient beings regarding this principle. Now let us earnestly contemplate these principles. Seeing those animals suffering and visualizing that the experiencer is oneself, what would happen? Didn't we also discuss before about killing sheep or cattle, or when other beings' bodies suffer various pains, we imagine it's ourselves? We often see this in cities too, for example in restaurants killing chickens, scalding their bodies with boiling water, cutting their necks with kitchen knives, or we see in some markets some eels or loaches being cut open in the abdomen with a knife, their internal organs completely removed. At this time, you should think if you became this being, what would the feeling be like? For any suffering, actually beings, and I have no difference. The feeling is the same. They also seek happiness and avoid suffering. I also seek happiness and avoid suffering. If it were me, for example, when we see someone sentenced to death, oh, this person is very pitiful. When we see an earthquake happening somewhere, when people are grieving in the ruins, we generate compassion for them. But when other beings are being slaughtered, why don't we generate such compassion? This has a certain relationship with our education, and our usual environment and concepts are all related. So as Mahayana Buddhists, treat humans and any other beings exactly the same. If you treat other beings exactly the same as your own biological parents, then your mind can basically be said to become the foundation of Mahayana Buddhism. We might as well try this too. For example, didn't we discuss before? When yaks and such are killed, they all die by suffocation. In this case, let's see. Cover your own mouth and nose with your hand, then interrupt breathing and hold for a moment. See what kind of pain and terror this brings. You can do this yourself. When you see some yaks dying by suffocation, at that time, I really used to do this often when I was small. When I saw others killing yaks, I would hold my breath. No one taught me this at the time. But sometimes it's also very strange, perhaps it's innate or something. I covered my own mouth, and when it finally became unbearable, I thought, oh, it has no freedom and must still endure the pain. When I really couldn't bear it anymore, if I removed my hand, I could relax, I could be at ease. But the pain during the process of suffocation, we completely know ourselves. Oh, if a being truly dies this way, being smothered, how extremely, extremely painful that would be. Similarly, any being, for example, when we see killing pigs or chickens, that kind of pain at that time, if it were transferred to my own body, when I use a knife or boiling water, when one drop of water scalds your own body, what kind of feeling would that be? You should observe this yourself. After such careful observation, you'll silently think in your heart, all beings who continuously experience such intense suffering are indeed truly in great pain. In our human world too, it's like hell has come to the human realm. Every day in the markets, every day in restaurants, there are countless beings who sacrifice their precious lives for some individual's appetite. Some also appear in natural disasters, especially now because technology is becoming more and more advanced. Many beings' lives can be said to be ruthlessly threatened in various ways. If I had the ability to rescue them from all their different sufferings, how wonderful that would be. Let's think this way, because if I could truly save them, not to mention us, even Shantideva and Atisha couldn't save all beings. When beings' karma manifests, even Buddha's skillful hands cannot protect them. This is very difficult. But we think in our hearts, if I had the ability, how wonderful it would be if all these beings could be saved. Or if I had the ability, even if it's just one being rescued from under the butcher's knife, this merit would also be inconceivable. Regarding the above principles, we must contemplate them again and again. Observing compassion, Mahayana Buddhism definitely requires, whether you live in a quiet place or go to the city, whether you're riding in a vehicle or walking, at any time during the 4 activities, this compassion can be observed. Many people say, I'm now practicing, I now have. Actually, a true practitioner can integrate all activities into practice. You can observe emptiness at any time. Observing compassion can be done at any time. You can think while eating. Sometimes we see many pitiful beings around us. That is practice. So-called practice doesn't necessarily require the Vajra posture or always keeping your eyes closed. Keeping your eyes closed is part of practice. It's a type of practice during sitting meditation, but true practice, especially for those whose practice is more mature, should find every place suitable for practice. If you have mindfulness and vigilance, wherever you go, some say it affects my practice. It's just that we beginners, when we truly practice, must close the door and choose a relatively quiet environment. But if you have some realization yourself, you can practice anytime, anywhere. So observing these suffering beings, especially observing some suffering beings, seeing some suffering beings when outside contacting people, sometimes after contacting people from all levels of society, only then can you truly understand the suffering of beings. If you don't, always in retreat, in a cave or in a pure practice room, it seems your environment is like heaven. You don't know at all how many cries there are outside. Now let's discuss that. We as monastics should be like the Buddha learned from the Buddha and also possess bodhicitta and compassion. Otherwise, we are indeed very ashamed. Especially so-called gurus and monastics should take the lead as examples of compassion. However, unfortunately nowadays, Some gurus and monastics have not the slightest compassion. The pain they cause to beings is even more serious than lay people. This is truly the end period of the Dharma. It's already the time of making offerings to meat-eating Rakshasas. Patrul Rinpoche here is particularly dissatisfied with some monastics' behavior. They wear the kashaya robes and shave their heads, go to quiet places or monasteries, renouncing worldly desires. The excellent path pursued by the teacher of gods and humans should be very worthy of admiration and rejoicing, whether as monastics or as gurus should be very remarkable, very noble behavior. But now some individual gurus don't have a drop of great compassion in their mind stream. The best and most important quality of a guru, as we discussed before, is great compassion. If great compassion is present, even if some other individual qualities are lacking, you can still rely on them when relying on a spiritual teacher. Patrul Rinpoche repeatedly emphasizes that great compassion must be present. If great compassion is not present, even though many other virtues may be present, they indeed cannot be considered spiritual teachers of Mahayana Buddhism. Therefore, some people's behavior not only has no benefit for beings, but instead brings harm and suffering to beings. Even the suffering they bring to beings is worse than lay people, now whether in Han regions or Tibetan areas. The behavior of some individual great masters is indeed extremely admirable. One person, two people, have indeed left very good impressions among many Buddhists and non-Buddhists at home and abroad, indeed left very good impressions. In an era, some behaviors are unimaginable to us, inconceivable. All their deeds are inconceivable. But some extreme individuals also use Buddhism's name with Buddhism's image. In the name of spiritual teachers, have damaged Buddhism's image and also damaged the pure tradition of many lineages. These people, if they make offerings to them, show respect and prostrate to them. It's no different from Rakshasas. Rakshasas have no compassion or loving kindness in their mind stream at all. Such beings who have neither compassion nor bodhicitta. So these types of people, some individual so-called monastics or gurus, are completely for accumulating wealth or their own status or other unwholesome behaviors. All kinds of unwholesome behaviors emerge. Some people I've met say this, such and such person is even worse than us lay people, because we lay people generally, especially some Buddhists, they don't drink or smoke. Usually they don't do many distracting things, including watching movies. Basically, except for their work and family affairs, everything is devoted to Buddhism. But some extreme individuals have particularly bad behavior in all aspects, and some bring a great deal of suffering to all beings. Indeed, there are quite a few such people nowadays. So the author here also severely criticizes these people. They cannot represent Buddhism, cannot represent Chinese Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism. They are only nominal Buddhists among Buddhists. Nominal Buddhists are not true Buddhists. This point we later learners must understand clearly. Otherwise, some people think that because some extreme individuals behave inappropriately, oh, Tibetan Buddhism is unreasonable because this person wearing red robes behaves so badly. Southern Buddhism is bad because the person wearing such robes is bad. Actually, it's this person's own behavior. They should be responsible for all the mistakes they commit. It should be this way. But this kind of thing also happens frequently. In the past, our great teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, also abandoned the throne of a universal monarch like Spit and resolutely left home. Buddha Shakyamuni was born into royalty, the prince of King Suddhodana. He had already renounced his throne and left home. That day in a school in Beijing, some students asked a particularly famous student from Beijing University has already become a monk. How do you view this? They seemed to think it very important, I said at the time. This is nothing special. Buddha Shakyamuni was also a very remarkable prince, and he also became a monk Shantideva, Atisha, and many others, including Padmasambhava. Many were of royal birth. They all gave up their thrones. Now, a slightly intelligent child becoming a monk is nothing remarkable. They seem to really think if the US president or China's highest leader became a monk, then we would all be a bit stunned, truly dumbfounded. A slightly intelligent student becoming a monk, what's special about that? When Buddha Shakyamuni became a monk through practice, he finally attained the fruition of perfect Buddhahood. At that time, the world-honored one and his retinue of arhats all carried alms bowls and staffs, walking on foot to beg for alms. Not only did Buddha's retinue not ride horses or mules, even the world-honored one never rode any mount. Here it says, the world-honored one and his retinue all begged for alms with bowls. At that time, logically speaking, India should have had these mounts, but they didn't use them, precisely because the Buddha thought that causing suffering to beings is not Buddhism's purpose. Otherwise, how could the world-honored one try every means and not get a horse to ride? Impossible. The Buddha was so wise and capable, particularly suffering, walking on the street carrying a bowl like a beggar. Actually, this is a kind of sign and warning for us humans. The simpler human life is, the better. People should wear 1 or 2 pieces of clothing. If there's excess in Buddhism's precepts, it's also said this is unreasonable. Food is the same way, but now humans on earth don't understand, so suffering continuously increases. This is one reason, and there's another reason. Buddha, at that time India also had no cars or motorcycles. These were all absent. But at that time, camels or oxen, horses, these were all present. India was relatively backward. Even now they often use oxen to pull carts on the streets, right? I've heard there should be, and there still are now. But why didn't Buddha ride horses everywhere to beg for alms? Actually, he was afraid of harming these beings. When beings are happy, Buddha rejoices. When beings suffer, Buddha grieves. Pleasing beings brings Buddha joy. Offending beings also harms Buddha. The way of the Bodhisattva also says, if beings are happy, Buddha rejoices. If beings are suffering, Buddha will be sad. If beings are pleased, Buddha is uniquely joyful. If we offend beings or harm beings, then Buddha definitely will not be pleased. So when we look at Buddha's entire behavior, we completely understand that from Buddha's generation of Bodhicitta to his attainment of Buddhahood after becoming Buddha, the sole purpose of continuously turning the Dharma wheel is to let all beings attain happiness and not experience suffering. I remember in Buddha's biography, when Buddha was in the causal stage, when he was Prince Siddhartha, he was with 500 children of the Shakya clan, practicing archery and martial arts together in a garden. At that time, Devadatta was also practicing martial arts in another garden. At this time, a flock of geese flew through the sky. At that time, Devadatta began shooting arrows at the geese. As a result, he hit one goose's body, and it fell into the Shakya clan's garden. At that time, Prince Siddhartha lifted it up, applied medicine to its wound, and cared for it with compassion. At this time, Devadatta sent people to demand that Prince Siddhartha return the goose. Siddhartha said, "After it dies, it's yours. While it's alive, it's mine. I won't give it to you." He sent people again, saying, "Whether alive or dead, you must return it to me. This goose was shot by me. It's not yours." Then Buddha said, "From when I generated Bodhicitta until now, I have never abandoned any being I have taken under my care. I absolutely will not return it to you." He also knew that if he returned it to Devadatta, it would definitely be killed immediately. "So, since it fell in my courtyard and I care for it, I won't return it to you until it dies." From these detailed stories and behaviors, we can also see Buddha truly had particularly profound compassion for every being we as Buddhists, indeed, sometimes feel very ashamed. What kind of compassion Buddha had for beings and our lineage masters, whether looking at their treatises, listening to their teachings, or understanding their actions, their entire life's work was unconditionally doing beneficial things for beings, but we ourselves truly cannot achieve such things. At this time, you can observe yourself or the behavior of bodhisattvas with particularly strong altruistic mind. Below, the author scolds and expresses dissatisfaction with some individual monastics' behavior, pointing out their lack of great compassion, mainly teaching this principle. Nowadays, some of our monastics, when going to lay households to perform rituals and other Buddhist services, are not like this. Buddha was like this. He wouldn't ride horses or camels throughout his entire biography. It was like this. As long as beings would suffer even a little, he absolutely wouldn't do it. But nowadays, what about our so-called extreme individual gurus? This story is mainly from when Patrul Rinpoche, the author, was in his area at that time. A story from his region people in big cities now may not necessarily feel anything when hearing this, but for me, I was a shepherd boy when I was small. So for me, it's still... I've also seen people riding yaks, both monastics and lay people. I myself also often rode yaks to herd cattle when small. So this kind of text is still very vivid for me. For you, it may not necessarily have a very deep feeling, but you can also understand that some monastics in plateau areas without compassion, their behavior is so unreasonable. Take this as our case study. When we ourselves encounter beings, or when you were small, or in your life when encountering beings, would you be like this? When I wrote Miserable Worlds, I learnt about many Dharma friends. Actually, many Dharma friends from childhood still formed certain connections with nearby beings. Some people from childhood had particularly strong compassion for beings. Some from childhood, seeing beings, hate them to the bone, immediately want to kill and eat them. There are such cases. So this behavior can also be seen. These monastics thread through a yak's nostril a particularly rough rope made of tail hair, made from yak tail hair. The tail hair is very coarse, so it's a particularly rough rope. They thread a rope through its nose. Then the monastic rides on the ox's back, forcefully pulling the rope with both hands each time he pulls. That yak suffers particularly painful nose pain. When the rope is pulled hard, the yak is in particular pain, then turns its head, originally walking straight forward, but when he pulls the rope hard, it's like braking. It doesn't advance, it turns around. Then the monastic becomes unhappy, forcefully using a whip, exerting all his strength to repeatedly strike its buttocks, because he forcefully begins to use the whip to severely beat it. At this time, that yak, unable to bear the pain, runs swiftly, because it's in particular pain. When in pain, it wags its tail while walking forward. When walking forward, the monastic becomes afraid again, because if the yak runs particularly fast, it's easy to fall from the ox's back. So he forcefully pulls the rope again. The monastic again grabs the nose rope. It again cannot bear the nose pain and stops. The monastic still beats it with the whip as before. This continues in cycles. Then he goes again, beats it hard again. The yak runs again. When it runs, he pulls hard again. When pulled hard, the yak stops. When it stops, because he needs to advance, there's no way. He probably doesn't know how to ride yaks well, probably just learning to ride yaks. Just like now when someone is just learning to drive, if you press the gas pedal too much, whoosh, you go too fast, then shh, when you brake, you stop again, like someone just learning to drive. The yak simply cannot advance. In the end, the ox's body is exhausted. Its heart feels indescribable pain. From every pore, drops of sweat flow outward. It sticks out its long tongue like a pack cover. Truly unable to walk anymore, there it pants heavily, making huff-huff sounds, because the yak, with this monastic riding, it continuously finally sweat poured out all over its body, and it stuck out its particularly long tongue. Pack covers were often used in Tibetan areas. Before, in their tents, there were many things piled together. They used pack covers to cover them. Actually, a pack cover is a large wool blanket for covering things. In ancient times, they were particularly particular about pack covers, color, shape, and so on. The things that people of each era are particularly attached to when looked at by later generations are all useless, but they were particularly attached to them because the yak was particularly tired. Its tongue also hung down long, ha-ha like this, roaring while doing so. I heard about pack covers because Patrul Rinpoche was from the Kham region. After he wrote it, the words of my perfect teacher later reached Lhasa, when some geshes from Ganden Monastery began teaching it. At that time there probably weren't dictionaries, and you couldn't necessarily find it in dictionaries. Now it seems this word is in the Tibetan Chinese dictionary, but it wasn't necessarily there then. So many geshes asked, what is this so-called pack cover? They didn't know. They probably had never seen one, especially many people from farming areas didn't know what kind of thing a pack cover actually was. Actually, it's a metaphor often used in nomads' colloquial speech. Be careful, don't make the yak too tired. Look, its mouth has already stuck out a tongue as long as a pack cover. You should go slower. Especially some elders telling children not to make the yak so tired. There's this saying, so at that time he said, because he was riding the yak finally panting heavily, making huff-huff sounds, truly unable to walk anymore. At this time, the monastic riding on the ox's back thought that this old ox really refuses to walk properly for me. He generated great anger and then used the whip handle and stick to fiercely strike its buttocks. This monastic was truly very bad. You all have no feeling at all. Because of his great anger and excessive force, the stick also broke into 2 pieces. Just now he used the whip handle to beat it, and as a result the stick was already beaten to pieces, broken into 2 pieces. After breaking into 2 pieces, that monastic probably had a strong miserly mind. Otherwise he could have just thrown it away, but he couldn't bear to throw it away, so he inserted it in his waist belt. I think one reason is he probably had a bit of miserliness and couldn't bear to discard it. Another reason is that in the Sershul area, timber is particularly scarce. I've been there before. It seems they're pillars and beams. Those pillars are all particularly thin, just as thick as a stove's chimney. It looks like you wouldn't dare live inside. Wood is basically very scarce there, so he probably thought it would be a pity to throw away the stick, so he immediately inserted it in his waist. Then he bent down to pick up a sharp stone, turned around from the ox saddle, and continued to pound that yak's buttocks. All this is caused by not generating even a little compassion in one's mind stream. A monastic riding a yak, then using stones to beat it, using whips to strike it, forcefully pulling ropes. In his mind stream, he fundamentally didn't regard the ox as a sentient being, so without great compassion, many people's behavior indeed becomes worthy of reproach. The Mahapurusa Shastra also says, though one may have wisdom and extensive learning, if one lacks compassion, one will also be criticized by people. Although some people have wisdom and are widely learned, but if you don't have compassion in your mind stream, whether you're a monastic or lay practitioner, your actions will be subject to reproach. So sometimes in our lives now, we often see that some people's behavior is indeed inappropriate. Not only in Tibetan areas, actually in Han regions, some monasteries also have such cases. I saw in which story formerly in India, there was a disciple of Nagarjuna called Master Subhakarasimha. This Tripitaka master later, following his guru's instructions, was required to go to the central land to propagate the Dharma, so he came to China. When he came to China, during the Tang dynasty, there was a relatively large monastery. At noon, he arrived at this monastery. He felt that the conditions for propagating the Dharma and benefiting beings there were quite auspicious and prepared to stay. As a result, that monastery's lunch was already finished. There was none left. Master Subhakarasimha still had certain psychic powers. Then he displayed supernatural powers, extending a long arm from the kitchen. He took all the rotten food and consumed it. And when he took and consumed it, his belly also became particularly large. All the things were completely eaten up, consumed entirely, swept clean. At this time, everyone in the monastery felt very, very surprised, wondering what to do. Today, a particularly strange monk had come. Later, the abbot said in the kitchen, including many people asking him what to do, a special monk had come. The abbot said, "You observe how his behavior is in all aspects." Later, during their observation, they found this person's mind was very pure, but his behavior was a bit strange, out of place. So what to do? Later, the abbot said that when evening came, they should drive him out and not let him stay in the monastery. Of course, Master Subhakarasimha was indifferent. In the evening, they drove him out. He sat outside at the gate, still meditating, indifferent. At midnight, with no moon, it was pitch black. At this time, the abbot's body seemed itchy inside his clothes. Accidentally, he caught a particularly fat louse. Then he immediately opened the window and threw it out. When he threw it out, that Master Subhakarasimha loudly shouted, "You've injured a Buddha's child." The abbot asked his attendant to look and see what happened below. They probably found the louse he had thrown down on the platform using a lamp. This attendant was quite capable. After finding it, Master Subhakarasimha said, "It's injured, its right third leg is damaged." When he went back and observed, it was indeed so. The abbot was particularly amazed and called the guest monk outside to come up. Then he worshipped him particularly, saying, "How did you know? I threw a small louse. How did you know in such darkness?" He said, "Every sentient being is actually a future Buddha. A sentient being's cry of pain can actually be heard by all the Buddhas of the 10 directions, and its cry is like thunder. That sound is very loud. If all the Buddhas of the 10 directions can hear it, how much more so for me, a monk sitting right here? How could I not hear it? I definitely can hear it." There are also such authentic stories, so I think whether in Tibetan areas or Han regions, ancient times or modern times indeed, among some Buddhists, they don't regard beings as life. As long as they themselves gain pleasure, they abuse with an indifferent attitude. This kind of behavior cannot approach Mahayana Buddhism at all. Such people, no matter how they recite mantras or practice meditation properly, if they have already harmed beings, it's impossible for them to be true practitioners. At this time, we concentrate and visualize that yak as ourselves. Didn't we just talk about visualizing on our own back? What we just said, if this yak, as discussed in the previous story, visualize on your own back, bearing an unbearably heavy burden, with your nose threaded with rope, your buttocks being constantly whipped, and your ribs being constantly pressed tightly by 2 stirrups, and there's a saddle on top. There may be many ropes tied everywhere around it, front and back. Everything is painful sensation with not a moment's rest. Still having to climb high slopes, rush down steep cliffs, ford great rivers, cross plains, without even leisure to eat a mouthful of food from dawn to sunset, constantly going back and forth unwillingly, experiencing such hardship, fatigue, pain, and thirst. If all these sufferings fell upon oneself, no matter who we are, when we see any sentient being, if these being sufferings fell upon our own body, what would it be like? Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. Seeking happiness and avoiding suffering are the same. Protect others as you protect yourself. This is taught in the way of the Bodhisattva. These are things we all say verbally in the world. Avoiding suffering and seeking happiness. All beings are the same. But if we truly want to protect other beings as ourselves, I'm afraid it won't work. Confucianism only says don't give to others what you don't want yourself. It only says this, but specifically how, there's fundamentally no actual action. This also has a very narrow scope, limited only to humans. But for all sentient beings, if when they suffer, we put their suffering upon our own body, we often speak of empathy, putting ourselves in others' shoes. What would happen at this time? Presumably, no matter who it is, they would definitely generate unbearably strong compassion. If we truly practice this in reality, initially, some people may not have strong compassion. Their temperament may be very rough and inferior, but gradually, under the guidance of Mahayana, Buddhism and spiritual teachers, one's mind stream is gradually nourished by the nectar rain of Mahayana Buddhism. The sprout of bodhicitta grows stronger and larger. This phenomenon occurs. So, sometimes when seeing beings, on one hand thinking beings are very pitiful, or thinking that beings are truly one's own parents is also possible. I also remember a story from the Tang dynasty. There was someone called Li Xin in winter. He was also riding a horse out on business. This horse was followed by a small horse as he rode. Eventually this horse couldn't walk anymore. When it couldn't walk, he severely beat it with a whip. When he beat it with the whip, it spoke in human language. "Don't hit me, I'm actually your mother. The one following behind me is your deceased younger sister. I owed your father 1 she of rice," an ancient measure, a unit of measurement from before. "Because of this reason, I've come to your family to repay the debt. Now I've basically paid it off, don't hit me anymore." At this time, Li Xin was extremely frightened and immediately got down from the horse. He carried the saddle on his own back, then confessed to it, saying, "I'm truly sorry, this way of acting is unreasonable. Since you are my mother, you surely know my home. When returning, you can lead the way and I'll follow you." When he returned, he first put the mare in front, of course. Since it was his mother, she completely knew the way home, so he followed behind and returned. After returning, his whole family specially built a stable for this mare and served it throughout its lifetime. Sometimes they brought it to monasteries for meal offerings, taking them together to create merit. I feel that during the Tang, Ming, and Sui dynasties there were many wonderful stories. Many kings and emperors indeed worshipped Buddhism very much, and many poets, those who wrote poetry, wrote particularly beautiful poems that were completely consistent with Buddhist education, which later generations often quote. However, in today's era of economic overflow, people think about money, money, money every day. Except for money, things like writing poetry, sitting peacefully, spiritual enjoyment have basically merged into the Dharmadhatu and disappeared. Sometimes looking at this world on the surface it seems particularly developed, but actually this inner tranquility, this inner happiness and some literary knowledge are decreasing more and more. Modern poets' poetry can basically no longer be seen. Why? Because science is too developed, isn't it? Below we discuss attachment to one's own side and hatred toward the other side, which are actually unreasonable. Originally, so-called gurus and monastics are impartial protectors and refugees for all beings. But some nowadays, today Patrul Rinpoche severely criticizes many gurus and monastics. Some of you lay people shouldn't think that monastics are bad and we lay people are good. You can't think like this. If gurus and monastics are so bad, then you lay people must have even heavier afflictions. There might be even more stories to write, possibly more cases, but it's not written here. Patrul Rinpoche shouldn't write about us thinking in their hearts that those who treat them warmly and make offerings are people of their own side, and saying orally, we must protect you, rescue you, and so on, and always granting them empowerments and blessings while regarding those led by negative karma to become inferior beings, troublemaking hungry ghosts, demons, and so on, as the enemy side generating great anger toward them in their hearts, and often speaking of killing and beating, making various striking gestures with their bodies. Truly determining that those spirits harmful to people should be beaten and killed. This shows that their mind stream has completely fallen under the control of either attachment or anger, also caused by not generating equal compassion. Without impartial mind, many of our human behaviors are indeed not very appropriate. We all know that when monastics are chanting sutras, they feel their benefactors contribute greatly to them and have great kindness toward them and must protect them. Whether it's other people or non-humans or disease demons that harm them, these are all what I should subdue. I should recite some evil mantras to destroy them. If they generate such anger toward them, this shows it's caused by not having compassion in their mind stream. With compassion, this is the ornament of gods and humans. The Sutra of the Right Mindfulness of Dharma also says, if adorned with compassion, one becomes a god among humans. If adorned with compassion, one is like a heavenly being among humans. If a person has no compassion, they are always poor. If a person has no compassion, it seems you have no compassion. If a person has no compassion, they are always poor. If a person doesn't have genuine Mahayana great compassion, actually whether in knowledge or behavior, they are indeed very impoverished. These monastics' actions are actually not what Mahayana practitioners should do. If we carefully observe, we'll discover that those harmful spirits are actually more pitiful than benefactors. Why is this so? Because these spirits that harm others due to negative karma are reborn as hungry ghosts with particularly inferior bodies, having countless sufferings and fears, often tormented by hunger and thirst, exhausted and weary, always in a state of restlessness and worry, their mind streams filled with anger, jealousy, and wild brutality. Most hungry ghosts after death immediately fall into hell. There are none more pitiful than them. We can say this. These beings are truly very pitiful. Therefore, toward diseased demons and beings that harm others, we should not generate anger toward them. As for benefactors, although they temporarily suffer some illness or pain through this, they will reduce the negative karma created in past lives and won't create negative karma in this life because of it. Sometimes when we see sick people, they appear very pitiful on the surface, but actually the more seriously ill they become, the more they're purifying karma. They themselves also say, I'm getting sick very well. I'm purifying karma. Those spirits that harm people harbor evil intentions to harm other beings. As a result, they will inevitably be led by this negative karma into the abyss of lower realms. Therefore, Buddha Shakyamuni, with great compassion and skillful means, taught powerful or manifest methods of expelling and subduing spirits. These exist in our Vajrayana and indeed also in the Sutrayana. There's a type of wrathful practice and a type of union practice. Such methods have always existed in the Tantras. This is actually compassion for these spirits, just like a mother scolding and hitting disobedient children. This kind of wrathful activity is only permitted for those who have the ability to cut off the negative karma of completely evil beings. It can be permitted front of some true gurus and who can guide their consciousness to pure lands. Only such people are permitted. It's permitted in front of such people. In the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, Buddha mentions a hungry ghost called Kwangye. At that time, the Kwangye hungry ghost ate people every day. Later, Buddha discovered that the conditions for taming the Kwangye hungry ghost had ripened, but if he appeared in human form, it would be completely unacceptable, so he transformed himself into a powerful demon. At this time, their demon palace shook and various harms appeared. At this time, they came out and were particularly afraid of the powerful demon. Finally, his own body manifested the form of the Tathagata. Then he transmitted the precept of not killing to him. Later, because he was a being that ate blood and flesh, he asked Buddha how to solve his livelihood. Buddha permitted him to perform food offering rituals, which Chinese Buddhism also often has. Actually, what's taught in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, also when Buddha manifested as a powerful demon, this was a type of wrathful activity, indirectly explaining a type of wrathful method. We can say this: otherwise, thinking of benefactors, monastics, and retinues as one's own side, generating attachment toward these people, clinging to them while thinking of spirits and those harmful beings as the other side, generating anger toward them. This kind of skillful means that protects one's own side with attachment and strikes the other side with hatred. How could Buddha have taught such skillful methods? It's absolutely impossible that he would teach this. So we must know that in Buddhism's true teachings, there's definitely no benefiting beings through hatred. If with minds of desire, anger, or fear, one abandons even one being who could be saved, this cuts the root of the Buddha path. This should be taught in the treatise on the 10 Bodhisattva grounds. So if we abandon or harm beings with anger, fear, or attachment, this is not the true Buddha path. So about the so-called wrathful activity, this is also explained here. One is having the ability to cut off beings' negative karma, and another, after cutting it off, being able to guide these beings to pure lands. Only in front of such people are these skillful methods permitted. Otherwise, Buddha would not permit them either. Below it says, if one lacks compassion or hasn't abided in the state of emptiness, wrathful practice is also very difficult, meaning it cannot subdue people who have such attachment and hatred. Expelling and striking those mental body spirits, not only can they not make them obediently comply, but will instead cause themselves to be deeply harmed. Not only can one not subdue with minds of attachment and hatred, even if one clings to those spirits as truly existing in their own nature, one similarly cannot control them. Formerly, when Jetsun Milarepa was staying in Chonglongchong County once, when he went out to gather firewood, suddenly a great windstorm appeared. When he returned with the firewood, because the windstorm was particularly strong and his clothes were tattered, the wind would blow his clothes away. When he held on to his clothes, all the firewood fell down. When he held the firewood, his clothes would blow away again. Around that cave, he encountered great difficulty like this. He couldn't manage both sides, so later he thought, forget it, don't be too attached. So it didn't matter if his clothes blew away. It didn't matter if he lost the firewood. When he stopped caring about everything, he managed to get a little firewood and returned. Just as he reached his cave, he discovered inside the demon king, Vinayaka had used magical powers to manifest 5 ugly demons with eyes as big as bowls sitting in his dwelling. It seemed one ugly demon on his bed was preparing to teach Dharma to 2 small demons below. The 2 small demons below were listening to the teaching. One one small demon was serving nearby, and another demon began turning through his scriptures. All 5 of them were messing around in the cave, some teaching Dharma, some listening to Dharma, some helping him do things. At first, Jetsun Milarepa thought, "Oh, these must be the mountain gods and earth gods of Chonglongchong Mountain where I live. The earth gods and I have a relatively good relationship. I've stayed here so long they haven't caused me any harm." Then he began singing them a song, saying how we can be harmonious, how the mountain is auspicious, how the water is auspicious. Milarepa sang them a Vajra song. "After I finish this song, I hope you'll still clear out of my cave. Just go back happily." As a result, after he finished singing, not only didn't these demons leave, but each one glared with big eyes, all baring their fangs, appearing as if they wanted to eat him, manifesting anger. At that time, Milarepa realized they were probably emanations of demons. Immediately he visualized wrathful deities and recited wrathful fierce mantras. He began reciting mantras to them, but reciting mantras also had no effect. Then he generated compassion and taught them the Dharma of cause and effect. Teaching the Dharma of cause and effect also had no effect. At this time, Milarepa truly had no options, the master thought in his heart. Guru Marpa had once transmitted to me to point out all phenomena of existence directly as one's own mind, and one's own mind's nature is also emptiness and luminosity. Clinging to all demonic obstacles as external definitely won't have any effect. All phenomena of samsara and nirvana, all manifested phenomena, are all illusory appearances of mind, and mind is also luminous, beyond elaboration, unconditioned, ineffable, inconceivable, such a state. So he abided in the understanding that all spirits are self-appearances, appearances of mind. Abiding in such certainty, he sang a spiritual song. It seems he sang a long one, singing of abiding in the Mahamudra and great perfection state. Then he directly entered the cave. At this time, the 5 ugly demons became very frightened, their eyes rolling around as they looked about. Then the 4 demons merged into the middle demon. One demon became a gust of wind and disappeared without a trace. At that time Milarepa discovered the windstorm I encountered at the cave entrance earlier was actually their mischief. Let's stop here, okay? There's also the story of the Rakshasi woman below, which is quite long, so I won't teach it. Alright, let's end here today.
Bandara Bandara